Okay, let's go over the bones of our skeletal system, the ones that you'll need to know for lab. We're going to start at the top and work our way down. So we're going to work through the axial skeleton first, which is all the bones on your core, in your head, and your neck, and then we'll move to the appendicular bones, which are your arms and your legs. So starting with our head, we have our frontal bone, we have our forehead here, so our frontal bone. We have the top and the side here made up of two parietal bones, a right and a left. The back and the base of the cranium is formed by the occipital. And on the really bottom base of the occipital, there's this big hole. It's called the foramen magnum, and this is where the spinal cord will come in and out. On the side of our cranium, we have our temporal bone. This is more in the ear region. So temporal, everyone thinks temple. Oh, it should be more here. No, the temporal bone is more in the ear region. It actually encloses the inner ear here. So our temporal bone. We have on our face, we have our mandible here. Take this off so we can see more. And then we have the sphenoid. The sphenoid starts more in our temporal region. It actually goes all the way through under the base, comes up the other side. So it's found on both sides. It forms the outside portion of your eye orbit. It almost acts as a U-joint that connects the two, the facial portion and the cranial portion of the skull. So that's our sphenoid. Also on our facial region, we have our zygomatics. These form the cheeks and this outer ridge. Boxers often break this when they get their eye orbits broken. It's often they're zygomatic. The nasal bones are just two thin bones right at the bridge of your nose, right at the top here. The majority of our face is actually made up of maxilla. So it forms this top part of our jaw here, everything the teeth touch, the outer edges of our nasal cavity, the base or bottom of our eye orbit, and the majority of our palate. So everything the teeth are touching through here is still maxilla. At the back of the maxilla, there's a small bone. You can almost, if you were to run a pencil from molar to molar here, you're going to find our palatine bone, the back of the maxilla. So it doesn't incorporate the whole palate, it's just at the back here. Down the middle of the nasal cavity is our vomer. It runs right down the middle, almost looks like a sail. We have two bones on the inside of our eye orbit. We have our lacrimal, right here on the edge. It's a small rectangular shaped bone. Okay. And then further back sits the ethmoid, back here. The ethmoid sits between the eyes and behind the nose. So it's one big solid bone, but it's making up the wall of both eye orbits. So the sides of the ethmoid reach both of the eye orbits. Moving from the skull, our next one is going to be our hyoid. This tucks up underneath your chin, right in here. And this is the only bone in the body that does not articulate with another bone. It's this little U-shaped bone. It's a site for attachments for around our voice box, for ligaments and muscles, but it's high up in the neck and doesn't articulate or form a joint with another bone. So this thin little U-shaped bone. If we talk about our vertebral canal, we have different segments of vertebrae. We have our cervical in our neck, our thoracic along our thoracic cavity and rib cage, our lumbar, which is our lower back, our sacrum, which forms part of the pelvic girdle, and then our coccyx vertebrae, which are our tailbone. So let's start up at the top. The first two are very important. We have our atlas, which is this round donut-shaped one, And then we have our axis, which is number 2, and it has this almost little turtle head coming out. It provides a pivot point for the atlas to turn. So atlas, AT, comes before axis, AX. And the atlas is flat and small and kind of donut shaped. I always think of the atlas as, with Greek mythology, you have Atlas holding up the globe. Well, our atlas holds up our globe as well. And the atlas and axis get special names because they allow our head to move this way and this way. So these two provide range of motion for our skull. They are part of the cervical classification. So they are technically cervical vertebrae, but because of their special functions, they get special names. The rest of the cervical vertebrae can be identified by these smaller holes on the side. These are called transverse foramen. So all of them have the big foramen down the middle. This is where your spinal cord will run through, but these transverse foramen on the side, this is unique to the cervical vertebrae. The next segment are thoracic. They have these longer spines, almost looks like a giraffe head and neck. So very long spines. Also on the sides there are facets or smooth spots for the ribs to come in and articulate. So they're going to come in and connect to the thoracic vertebrae on the sides. So you can see little flat spots as you're looking at them. Our lower region down here, our lumbar vertebrae, these are big and clunky, and they're very much weight bearing. So all the weight from your upper body is going to come down on these before it's dispersed to your right and left sides. So they have very big, clunky bodies. And also all the processes on top, it almost looks like a moose antler up here. So this is our lumbar vertebrae. Very big, very clunky, looks like moose antlers up on top. Our sacrum and our coccyx, or coccygeal vertebrae, you can also refer to the sacrum as sacral vertebrae. They help form part of our pelvic girdle here. So our sacrum is the one with all these fun little holes in it. Initially it starts out as 5 individual bones, but as we mature, it fuses into one solid bone. And then our coccyx, our tailbone, are just a small little grouping of bones that almost looks like a rattlesnake tail that come off the sacrum. Okay, back up top, we have our sternum, our chest plate here, our bone that overlays the heart and helps protect the thoracic cavity. It's actually lighter than what you would think. It's pretty light. It's not quite as dense as what you would anticipate the sternum to be. Our sternum. Our ribs. So we have 24 total, 12 on each side. There are these comma-shaped, C-shaped bones. Some individuals have a little 13th, and sometimes they have a 13th vertebrae as well, thoracic vertebrae. So it's not uncommon that you might have an extra rib and thoracic vertebrae, a 13th one. But 12 is the norm, is the standard that we often see. We have our clavicle. It's going to help form the pectoral girdle. It's kind of S-shaped, squiggly. And then we have our scapula, which is also going to form the pectoral girdle along our back here, commonly called our shoulder blade. Sits around here. It almost looks like a little garden shovel that you could scoop some dirt with, but this is our scapula. The humerus is our upper arm here. It has this nice smooth ball-shaped structure. It's going to go into that socket, so it will have a nice ball and socket joint that provides a large range of motion. Our lower arm is composed of two bones that sit right next to each other. We have our ulna with this U shape in it, so if you think U for ulna. And we have the radius. It has almost like a little radio button on top. So I think radio button, radius. The radius is lateral or thumb side, and our ulna is medial or pinky side. And this is really important. These two bones are the reason anatomically correct position is palms forward. Because if you rotate your palm down, the radius and ulna cross. And you can't say which one's lateral and which one's medial because at some point they both are. So why we have anatomically correct position with palms forward is because the ulna and radius lay nice and neat next to each other. All right, our hand. Carpals are the tricky ones. There's 8 of them, and they form about 2 rows. There's this first row that comes along here. It's kind of curvy, and then the second row that actually touches the metacarpals. So we can go through these quickly. Starting thumb side, bottom row, we have our scaphoid, our lunate, our triquetrum, and on top of that sits our little pisiform. Okay. So scaphoid, right here, lunate, triquetrum, pisiform. Back to the thumb side in our second row, our top row here, we have our trapezium, our trapezoid, capitate, and hamate. So our hamate has this extra little hook on, which is another point that you can use to adjust yourself if you need to and kind of orientate yourself where you are in the carpals. So second row, trapezium, trapezoid, capitate, hamate. These can take a while to get to know. What I recommend is start the same place every time that you're learning them. That way it doesn't matter if you're looking at a picture that is right or left hand, or if it's palm or back, you'll be able to figure out what you're looking at. So I always start thumb side, bottom row at the scaphoid, go through my line, come back, go second row here with the trapezium, and go through the second row. Our metacarpals are this line of bones through here. They make up your palm. There are 5 of them, and they get numbered 1 through 5. So thumb side is 1, pinky side is 5. So for instance, this one here right in the middle would be our metacarpal 3. Our fingers are made up of multiple bones, as you can tell when you bend your fingers. So we name them our phalanges, means all the bones within one finger. A phalanx is one single bone. So each layer gets a name as well. So we have our proximal phalanges that touch the metacarpals. We have our distal phalanges, which we find our nails on. And then our pointer finger through our pinky have a middle phalange as well. And these also get numbered 1 through 5, 1 being thumb, 5 being pinky. So for instance, if we wanted to name this one here, this would be our second proximal phalanx, or proximal phalanx number 2. This one here would be our 4th distal phalanx, or distal phalanx number 4. So you need to incorporate a number, a directional term, is it proximal, middle, or distal, and then phalanx. Our pelvic girdle is made up of 2 os coxa, a right and a left, and our sacrum, as we previously mentioned. Our os coxa is actually formed by 3 bones. We have our ilium, which is this big splayed bone here. Our ischium, which is a little bit more rounder and chunky here. And our pubis, which is a little thinner and has this flat spot where it will form the symphysis with the other side. So pubis, ischium, ilium. And when I'm working with them, ilium is always up. That's what you feel when you put your hands on your hip. This nice crater here, this is the acetabulum. This is where the femur will come in. So you want the ilium up and the acetabulum out. And then it will sit in its nice direction. So ischium down, pubis in front. Our femur is our thigh bone here. Like the humerus, it has this nice rounded ball and it fits into the acetabulum, which is a nice socket. So again, we have large range of motion happening here. We have these nice condyles, kind of rounded surfaces on the distal end that let your hinge of a knee joint work. These condyles sit on top of the tibia, and the tibia has this nice flat surface for those condyles so that they can rotate back and forth. And I always think it looks kind of like a T, flat top. So we have our T for a tibia. Our patella, which is just a small little bone. This is commonly called our kneecap. To me, it looks like the perfect skipping stone that you go skipping across the lake. So small, rather thin, kind of flat. The second bone in our lower leg is the fibula. This one kind of looks like an arrow to me, and pointy end, maybe feathers. So this is our fibula. And you need to be careful with tibia and fibula. People like to mesh the terms together and reword them and rework them. So they are two separate terms. You need to be very careful and practice their spelling. So tibia and fibula. Our foot is pretty similar to our hand in that we have a bunch of pebble-like bones forming the ankle joint here. These are our tarsals, and our wrists are called the carpals, and the foot, they're called the tarsals. There are a number of them. The first, this big one here, is our calcaneus. This is what makes up the heel. Sitting on top of that is our talus. It has this nice smooth area. It almost looks like a turtle. Again, there's a little head, here's its shell, and there's maybe a little bony foot and tail pointing out. And this is where the tibia is going to sit and allow you to move your foot up and down. So our talus. Off the talus, we have our navicular. This is a flatter, broad bone. And on top of it sit three bones. They're all called the cuneiforms, but they get directional terms as well. So we have our medial, so close to the midline, medial cuneiform, our intermediate cuneiform, so it's in between, and then our lateral cuneiform, so further away from the midline. So medial cuneiform, intermediate cuneiform, and lateral cuneiform. The last tarsal is kind of this big square shaped one, and this is cuboid. So if you look at these four here that all touch the metatarsals, if you were looking for a way to remember them, they spell milk. So medial, M, intermediate, I, L, lateral, and C for cuboid. All of those touch our metatarsals, as I mentioned, and just like with our hands, with the metacarpals, these get numbered as well. So our metatarsals, 1 through 5, 1 being big toe side, 5 being little toe side. So this one here would be metatarsal 2. Our toes are named exactly the same as our fingers. So this one would be our distal phalanx number 1, or our 5th proximal phalanx. So exactly same names as we see with our hands. And like our thumb, our big toe only has 2. There's only a proximal and a distal. There's no middle with a big toe like we see with our thumb as well, that there's no middle phalanx in our thumb. So these are our bones. The key with especially the long bones is to look at the ends. They're just these long shaft-like structures. But look at the ends. They designate what type of movement that bone will do. So make sure you look at the ends. That's going to tell you which bone it is. They all look very different. So the epiphyses represent what kind of movement and are formed so that it can do that movement, and it's reflected in its shape. So make sure you pay attention to the ends, not necessarily the shaft in the middle.